Okay, this is the second video of our River Erosion unit. Today we're focusing on how a river changes really from its source down to its mouth, okay? And actually what happens to the river itself, what happens to the landscape. So if you've got a question that was asking you about, state two characteristics that can change between the source and the mouth, you can talk about these sorts of things, or state how two variables, to state why two variables change, anything about how the river changes. I think that's the point I'm getting at, okay? So, up in the sort of upland area of the river, up in its upper course, where you've got the source, and where you've got your V-shaped valleys, okay, often the gradient of the land around the river is steep. The actual gradient of the river itself is steep because it's just starting out. Many of our rivers are up in mountains, and so therefore you've got those steep gradients on mountain sides and valley sides, etc. Okay. At this point, you've got a lot of turbulence and a lot of friction. So in terms of talking about turbulence and friction, that happens. A lot of energy is lost because the river is having to work very hard to actually find its way down the channel. Okay, the channel characteristics: it's a very narrow river and it's a very shallow river. So two things that will change as the river flows downstream is that rivers will get wider and rivers will get deeper. Okay, the amount of energy that they possess will also increase. And how do we know that? Well, if we look at another variable, which is bed load, which is material in the river, your rocks, your stones, etc. When we are in the upper course, the size of the bed load is much larger, so you get much bigger rocks sat in the river channel. And the reason they're sat there is because the river doesn't have the energy to do anything with them. It can't move them because it's not wide enough, there's not a big enough volume of water in the river, so it can't wear them down. So to quickly recap, what we're saying is what changes from source, the start of the river, down to mouth is the shape of the river. It goes from being very narrow and very shallow to very wide and very deep. What else changes? The size of the bed load. We go from having very large rocks and boulders which sit in the river channel, aren't eroded because the river doesn't have energy, to having very small material, okay? And we'll get to that in another video about what you call that. But the size of your particles, the size of your bed load decreases significantly as you move downstream. Something else that increases is the river's amount of energy. The river has the energy to move material as you move downstream, as it flows downstream. It's also got the energy to erode material as it flows downstream as well. And that is linked to another thing that changes, which is the sheer volume of water. Okay? Because you've got a wide river and a narrow river, the sheer volume of water increases from source to mouth. Okay? So they are the key sorts of things that you can speak about. Okay? In terms of that velocity, in terms of speed of flow, although it often looks like velocity is fastest in the upper course of the river because the water looks like it's flowing faster, it's actually fastest in the lower course of the river. And again, that's linked to energy. So if you want a final one really, you can talk about velocity, and the velocity of the river, the speed of the flow of the river increases as you move downstream. Okay? So, we know that a river can erode. The first process that our river does that helps it shape itself, reasons why it becomes wider, it becomes narrower, you see less rocks, is to do with erosion. Okay? So a river will erode, it will erode its banks, and it will erode its bed. So it will make itself wider, it will make itself deeper, and it will erode the material that is in it. Okay? It is worth being aware of four key things that can increase the amount of erosion that a river can do. Okay? So the first is gradients. If you've got steep gradients on either side of your river, then that can have an influence on how quickly the river can erode its banks, because a steeper gradient increases energy as water moves downstream quicker. So you've got steep valley sides, but you've also got a river that's going down a gradient like that, then obviously that water is flowing faster, and therefore, as it moves downstream quicker, it increases the rate of erosion, okay? The sheer gradient gives the river more speed to erode its banks. So gradient will affect the rate of erosion. Bed load size. Increased bed load increases abrasion because more material is carried. Large material is carried, scrapes along the banks and the bed of the river, and again makes it wider, makes it deeper. So where you've got more amounts of bed load, where you've got larger amounts of bed load that the river carries, it will scrape along the side. Human factors. Cutting down trees, changing the landscape increases surface runoff, meaning a greater volume of water reaching the river. So if a greater volume of water is reaching the river, that's increasing its amount of energy, increasing its volume, giving it more power to erode. And we as humans cause that because we can cut down trees, which reduces infiltration, reduces interception, and therefore less water reaches the ground. If you cut down the trees, you get less interception because more water reaches the ground. Finally, rock type, where you've got weak, softer rocks, where your river channel is made of weak, softer rocks, such as sand and gravel. They will erode more easily than like a rock like granite or limestone that erodes more slowly over time. Okay, so be aware of how a river changes its characteristics from source to mouth. The sort of variables that change, the width, the depth, the volume of water, the velocity, the size of the bed load, the level of energy that the river possesses, and then be aware of your first process that a river does, which is erosion, okay? And the factors that can affect how quickly a river erodes its banks and its bed.